during the hegemonic peace, it didn't have to take into Russia's security concerns into account, because by definition, hegemonic peace is you're so dominant it doesn't matter what the Russians think. But this is why it's interesting now. If you look at Ukraine as well, that is the Europeans are essentially demanding that peace. Lasting peace depends on a powerful deterrent. That is like a 800,000 strong army backed by the Europeans, armed to the teeth. And this will make sure that Russia never again dares to attack, that there won't be another special military operation. Meanwhile, the Russians are making the point that, they never had any hostile intentions. And if you ask, will there be another special military operation? Well, only if NATO continues to deepen its involvement in Ukraine. Then there will definitely be another special. So what is security for the Europeans? That is deterrence, is a security threat to the Russians, which is what will start a war. So it's this whole principle of a security competition, that you have to find a way of taking into account the other guy. I don't think again, under hegemonic peace, we never had to take into account the security of the other guy. And that's why I think the whole strategic thinking gonna have to shift. But in terms of the future of NATO, though, again, the reason why people think it's all about Trump, I think it's mistaken, because even Obama back in 2016, he's the one who said we have to pivot to Asia. Well, why? Because a new center of power is emerging. We do have limited capabilities. We can't be everywhere. So that implied we have to get a bit out of Europe too. So this is not all on Trump's shoulders. But then if you extend on that logic, if you recognize the Chinese are a new power, well, why would you expand NATO? Because the national security strategy specifically says that, we shouldn't have more of this NATO expansion. Well, if you expand NATO, that would deepen the US commitment in Europe, and it would intensify tensions with Russia, even more resources, and it would push the Russians to China. In Asia is actually where the main US rival is. So none of it actually makes sense for US national interests. So I think this is why it's a very durable shift we're going to see over the years and decades to come. And so just to think that Trump doesn't love democracy as much as us, or freedom, this is why he's doing this, I think is a miscalculation, though.
Yeah, no, I agree. I strongly suspect, I don't know, but I strongly suspect that on the NATO side, but also on the general European part of the document, that Vance will have been a key author there. Even back 2 to 3 years ago, before the election, he was one of the few, in fact, possibly the only senior American politician who was actually arguing for a much more nuanced approach with Russia and suggesting that there might be a problem in the war. And he would be occasionally he was doing speeches on the floor, which almost nobody attended. But when you listened to it, it showed a very nuanced understanding of what was going on, and a much, much better understanding than the neocons. I think there's still a debate, of course, in America, and I'm sure that we neocons and neolibs who are saying, well, we just got to be a bit more rough and ready with Russia and sort of heavy up on them. I think, though, that increasingly people will start to see, in the same way that Vietnam failed, that actually that they couldn't do it even if they wanted to. So what I would hope is that over time we'll see an increasing consensus in America as the defeat unfolds. And I think what we'll also see is, I would imagine, is that the Americans will start to say the key irritants in this and stopping us draw this war to a close and reestablish a relationship with Russia are the Europeans, but particularly the E3, or I think as Judge Napolitano has called them, the three blind mice, who are actually actively acting in a way which is counter to America's vital national interests, which is a very bad way to think, I think, if you're looking to try and retain America and NATO. It's perverse, but unfortunately, again, I think it's another example of this cult thinking. So I think what will happen, I think as next year starts to pan out and the Russians move from what I would call an offensive attritional war into an expansion, as they start to move to secure the territories that they believe will guarantee security, whatever what, then I suspect we'll start to see a recognition, increasing consensus across the American military establishment, the American political establishment, left and right, not least of all, because why would they want to pay any more? And if the Europeans can't afford to pay, what's the point in them trying to sell us weapons if they know that we can't afford to pay, given that we'll just use them in a way and the Russians will just destroy them. So I suspect that we'll actually start to see the war not get into its conclusion, because I think there's a bit of time before that, but get into a stage where it's impossible to ignore. And when it becomes impossible to ignore that NATO's been defeated and that Ukraine's been defeated and that Europe's been defeated, then I would at last start to hope that there will be, it may be accompanied by political change in Europe, difficult to say where that might happen. But I think what will become clear is that Europe needs to think again, that America has shifted its view of its own vital national security interest. Europe's no longer top, and indeed probably about third on the list, if that. The American contribution to European security will not include security guarantees. It will not include Article 3, Article 5. So really, we're starting to talk not about NATO, but about NATO minus, which is NATO without the Americans, and NATO minus is not a powerful organization. And I would just hope it would actually start to engender a period of better strategic reflection and strategic thinking, and so that hopefully we'll at least be able to start to have a debate about this in Europe, and that Europe won't try to shut people up as they have done to Jacques Bourd, who you and I are both great friends of, and who's been shut up simply because he's actually telling, as far as I can see, the truth, and very well referenced truth, but because it goes against the ideology and it goes against the narrative, he's actually, in a way, they're demonstrating that actually the Americans are right when they say that democracy and free speech are being subdued in Europe, because the Europeans have just done it by shutting down Jacques Bourd's voice. But let's hope. I don't quite know what that will look like, but I think it's going to be quite chaotic politically over the next year and possibly 2 years.
Again, it's a colonel in the Swiss army working for NATO, and so I think it's going into the history books as not just being on the right side of history, but the EU doing a massive mistake. Of course, it's a symptom of a wider problem. Let me just ask a last question, though. And where do you see the possibility of an EU-US conflict going? Because you do mention this three blind mice, or the UK, France, and Germany, which are now acting in direct opposition to US national interest. But you also see now the United States in the national security strategy. It talks about cultivating opposition in Europe, which is kind of what we've been doing around the world with the Americans. That is a bit of a regime change. But you also have this leaked US report that the US envisions different MAGA allies, that is Austria, Hungary, Italy, and Poland, which should be pulled out of the EU. So there's almost a battle plan in place in terms of how to rescue European civilization, if you will, by breaking up the EU. So we're already seeing not just the rhetoric, but the intentions and actions going up against each other.